I hope I'm audible and that you can see the presentation. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today our topic will be a short one. It's just a 1-hour lecture and it will be on muscle tone, posture and equilibrium. So as you can see from the title, you know that these are all topics, parts of which you've already learned. You learned about the muscle tone being a function of stretch reflex. You learned about the vestibular apparatus, the cerebellum, basal ganglia, all these having functions to do with the posture and equilibrium of the body. So today our focus will be more on how all these relate together, how they work together to help us maintain a normal muscle tone which is required for a normal functioning, for us to walk, for us to be able to stand stably or to sit in a place properly. This is what we'll be looking into today. So all of you would have childhood experiences, maybe even adult experiences of things like when you spin around for a while, or you get on a merry-go-round and go around for a while and get off of it, you tend to feel giddy and fall down. You already learned from the vestibular apparatus, and you know that that has to do with the vestibular apparatus, the giddiness that is caused. But when you do fall down, whether you fall down when you're giddy like that, or when you're falling, let's say you got up from bed, suddenly hearing the alarm clock, you are not fully awake, you're going to fall down. What do you do then? When you're about to fall down, what do you do? Aditya, could you answer me? Aditya MP?
Sir, we'll hold somewhere.
Yeah, we reach out to hold something. So who taught you to do that?
Involuntary response.
Good. So that's an involuntary response. So this is be the basis of what we are going to be learning today. The various involuntary responses that are part of our body that have been taking place from the time we were children, maybe a few months of age or maybe a couple of years of age till now. They are protective reflexes on one hand. On the other hand, they are very core to our normal functioning. If you want to stand up, if you want to walk, you want to take a load, you want to do some work, the background posture is very essential. We need to have the right posture to be able to efficiently do something that is on our mind to get done. This is all maintained by the posture and the muscle tone, posture and equilibrium. So as just Aditya said, you can see this lady, she's running, she trips and falls. You can see that when she's falling, her hand is outstretched. She's trying to protect herself, protect her face, protect herself from a hard fall. This is something we all have experienced. As she said just now, this is actually a involuntary response, not something that we do voluntarily. The next video will help you to understand that a bit more better. Look at this child. The child is only 3.5 weeks old. When the baby is almost put to the table like that, face down, there is no response. But now at 10 or 11 months old, you can see that when she is going down, automatically her hand is stretching out. This is not something she has learned or been taught, but this is something innate. This is a function of our postural reflexes, which we'll be looking at today. This is something that you do automatically. And here you can see this man, he's trying to go up a hill, but he is not able to maintain a proper posture for that. Our body is designed such that the center of gravity is slightly in front of us. So that helps in the forward motion more normally. That balance is maintained by the various anti-gravity muscles in our body. All this is a very complex function that we'll be studying under these headings of muscle tone, posture, and equilibrium. So, how do we define posture? Posture can be defined as a physical attitude adopted by the body under different circumstances so as to support the body against gravitational and other forces. Again, It is a physical attitude that our body adopts in various circumstances. It's not just about standing and walking. It's involved in your sitting, in every activity that you're doing right now. Your posture is important to be able to do the activity properly, to do the activity efficiently. In fact, a lot of our present day problems that are faced by people, especially now that a lot of work is being done from home, especially in the IT field and many other sectors, it is actually in the software industry that these issues are first noticed. People who are sitting in their chairs for a long time and working in front of their computers, they found out that these people started getting obese on one side. Another side, these people started having problems like backaches, neck pains. They started having issues with their wrists, like carpal tunnel extra etc., with their constant working on the keyboard and all. That is when they started correcting it by having working desks and all, standing desks for working, etc. And many companies promote getting up and walking around after an hour's work and all those things. So normal posture is very important when you're for efficient work. If you're working in an abnormal position, for example, most of you would be sitting in front of a mobile screen or a computer right now. So if you're curled up in your bed right now, or you're hunched up in a sofa, you're soon going to get neck pains. If you look around, you'll see that people with stoops are getting more and more. The stoops, the hunchback in the shoulder and neck are getting more and more. It's real. We have seen many memes and many trolls on this, but it's real. We are spending so much time looking down on our phones that all those muscles in the neck, their tones are deranged. Some muscles are working overtime, some muscles are not being used, and we get a lot of neck pains, hand issues, a lot of things like that. So what would be your right posture right now? You should be sitting on a table and chair. You should be sitting up straight. You shouldn't be looking down on your phone screen or on your laptop or tablet screen. Rather, either you should be able to look level at it or slightly above. That is the best posture for your neck and back. Two things work there. One is the posture helping with your neck and all. Second is the erect posture keeps you more alert rather than the lying down posture. It has to do with your reticular activating system. Okay, so to move on to the topic. So posture is the physical attitude adopted by the body under different circumstances so as to support the body against gravitational and other forces. And the basis of what is happening here is the ability to keep certain groups of muscles in sustained contraction. When I'm standing up straight, I need all my anti-gravity muscles, the postural muscles of my back, the muscles of my hip, the muscles of my thigh and calf, all of them, the extensors to be stretched so that I can maintain an erect posture. So for each activity, a certain set of muscles need to be in a sustained contraction. So those are called postural muscles. They are varying from posture to posture. So posture meaning muscles should have they shouldn't be easily fatigued. For example, a person who's standing for a long time, say when I'm taking a lecture for you in class, I will be standing for an hour or so. So the muscles of my back and my hip and my thigh should not fatigue over that time. So for that, these muscles usually known as the postural muscles. Most of the postural muscles are the extensors of our body, related more to the core of the body, that is related to the spine, the axial skeleton and the girdles. These muscles, these have more of red fibers which are slow contracting and not easily fatigued. And another function that these muscles have is asynchronous contraction. That is, all the muscle fibers in the group of muscle will not be contracting at the same time. They are modulated in such a way that a certain group of them contract for some time. Afterwards, another group of them contract while this group relaxes. That way, they do not fatigue out and help us to maintain posture for a longer time. So that is what posture is. So how do we maintain posture? The decision for a particular posture will arise from the cerebral cortex. The planning and programming happens in the basal ganglia and cerebellum. Information comes through the pyramidal tract to the motor neuron supplying the muscles involved. So have this picture in your mind throughout our lecture today. So when you want to maintain a particular posture, so you're deciding that you need to run. So the angle at which you are going to poise yourself, the way you're going to use your muscles, everything is planned out. In the association areas of your brain, the basal ganglia and cerebellum coordinate that well, and then down through the pyramidal and some extrapyramidal fibers also, these come down to the motor neurons supplying the muscles involved. Especially the pyramidal is more involved with the postural muscles. Postural muscles, as I told, are the core muscles, the axial muscles of the body. More of the pyramidal practice involved. Have this picture in your mind. This picture will help you remember how this is being done and help you understand what happens with the lesions also. So this is the roughly the idea of how it is happening there. So an idea or thought arising in the brain, in the cortex, the lateral cerebellum, the basal ganglia, they plan out this activity together. The cortical motor, from there the plan is given to the cortical motor areas. The action, the order for the action passes down through the spinocerebellum, the brainstem, motor nuclei, and spinal cord, finally down to the muscles through the final common pathway, as you learned at the alpha motor neurons coming from the ventral root of the spinal cord. This is how the posture, I mean, any movement is worked out this way, and posture is part of every movement. So, what are the brainstem pathways involved in posture and voluntary movement? Now you have an idea of all the brainstem pathways, they have all been covered for you. So, which of these are more involved in our posture and voluntary movement? You would remember I told that it is mainly the muscles of the trunk and proximal parts of the limbs that are associated with posture. So, yeah. So, these muscles are controlled in the ventral horn. We told that finally the final common pathway starts from the ventral horn of the spinal cord, the alpha motor neuron to the various nerves. Of these neurons, of the ventral horn neurons, the medial part group of neurons, as you can see here in this diagram, just a moment. Okay. So the medial group of motor neurons are more involved with the control of the postural muscles, the muscles of trunk and proximal part of the limbs. Whereas the lateral group of motor neurons, we are talking about just the neurons in the ventral horn. Of those, the medial part of them are more controlled with the proximal part of the limbs, and the lateral part with the peripheral fine motor activity. So if you look at your upper limb, you would see that the muscles of the shoulder girdle and the immediate muscles like the biceps brachii, etc., biceps, etc., will be controlled by the medial group of neurons. Whereas the distal muscles of your hands, of your fingers, those that are concerned with the finer movements will be controlled by the lateral group. So you can just remember it easily by medial means towards the center of the body, right? So the medial group of neurons will control those which muscles are more towards the center of the body. Lateral is more towards the peripheral, so they control the more peripheral muscles. Then their function is more to do with the fine motor activities. So the brainstem and spinal cord, the medial or ventral groups have the descending pathways that will control the postural muscles. The main tracts that are involved here are the anterior corticospinal tract, the tectospinal tract, the reticulospinal tract, and the vestibulospinal tract. So anticorticospinal, you know, it's the pyramidal tracts coming from the cortex. Then the tectospinal, the reticulospinal tracts from the reticular formation, the vestibulospinal tracts from the vestibular nucleus and the cerebellum. All these are the main tracts that are involved with the regulation of posture. So, having said all this, what are the mechanisms that are involved in the maintenance of posture and equilibrium? That's what we are going to look at next. So, can anyone tell me, let's say, Anshad Kabir, number 32. Can you tell me what would be the mechanisms that are involved in maintenance of posture and equilibrium? What would be the factors that are involved in this? Anshad? Okay. Nikhil, number 129, Nikhil. Guys,
Sir,
yeah, tell me. So what is the mechanisms in what are the mechanisms probably involved in the maintenance of posture and equilibrium? നമ്മൾ ഇതുവരെ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ തന്നെയാണ്. What probably is involved in this function? Posture maintain ചെയ്യാൻ എന്ത് വേണം? I just told now, no? For when I'm standing straight, certain muscles are working. So what do those muscles basically require? Extension ശരി. So നമ്മൾ അപ്പർ മോട്ടോ ന്യൂറോൺ ലീഷൻസ് ലോവർ മോട്ടോ ന്യൂറോൺ ലീഷൻസ് ഒക്കെ പഠിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടല്ലോ. അവിടുത്തെ ഒരു സിഗ്നിഫിക്കൻസ് എന്തായിരുന്നു? വാട്ട് ഹാപ്പൻസ് ഇൻ UMN ലീഷൻസ് ഇൻ ദ മസിൽസ്?
മസിൽസ് അട്രോഫി വരത്തില്ല.
അതിന് മുമ്പ് ബിഫോർ ദാറ്റ് ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ്ലി ഒരു മസിലിന്റെ ഫംഗ്ഷൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ കോൺട്രാക്ട് ചെയ്യുക, റിലാക്സ് ചെയ്യുക. അത് റിലേറ്റഡ് ആയിട്ട് അവിടെ എന്ത് സംഭവിക്കും അപ്പർ മോട്ടോ ന്യൂറോൺ ലീഷൻസിൽ? I'm asking about the tone of the muscle. What happens to the tone of the muscle?
Tone increase.
Yeah. So that is what. So one of the important factors for the maintenance of posture is the tone of the muscle or muscle tone. What else would be? നമ്മൾ ഇപ്പൊ ഇതുവരെ പറഞ്ഞത് വെച്ചിട്ട് മെയിൻ്റനൻസ് ഓഫ് പോസ്ചറിന് അടുത്ത് എന്താ വേണ്ടി വരിക? ആദ്യം ഞാൻ കുറച്ച് GIF-ഉം വീഡിയോ ക്ലിപ്സും കാണിച്ചില്ലേ? What did we see in that baby? What was the baby doing when it was falling down? Okay, I'll leave it. So the next important thing is the postural reflexes. So what we need for maintenance of posture and equilibrium is, at the basic level, we need a muscle tone. That is a muscle that has a proper tone that is ready to contract at the moment it is ordered to by the central nervous system. Second is the various postural reflexes. When we talk about posture, a lot of things can be done voluntarily also. When you know that you're going to be pushed down, you will be voluntarily ready to hold out to something or something. That is a voluntary part of it. Here we are more of talking about what happens involuntarily is what we are talking about by postural reflexes. As you already know, reflexes are involuntary actions, not voluntary. So posture maintenance can have a voluntary and involuntary component. Here we are talking about what happens involuntarily. So muscle tone and postural reflexes are what are required for the maintenance of postural and equilibrium. So we'll be looking to today at the how the muscle tone is regulated and how what are the postural reflexes. This will be the main topic that we'll be discussing. So muscle tone is defined as a resistance of muscle to stretch. You know all this, and we know that when there is increased tone, we call it hypertonia or rigidity, and decreased tone is known as hypotonia or flaccidity. As Nikhil said, now in upper motor neuron lesions, where there is a lesion starting from cerebral cortex up to just before the ventral horn is the upper motor neuron. So until then, if there is any lesion, what we see is a rigidity or increased tone of the muscles, whereas in the lower motor neuron, that is starting in the common final pathway, either in the ventral horn, alpha motor neurons to the motor, or in the facial, if it's a this is to do with the spinal nerves. In the cranial nerves, the final cranial nerve that is supplying the muscles in the body, in the face or neck, etc. Their palsy will lead to flaccidity or hypotonia, and these, as you know, are tested by passive movements. You have all done that in practicals. So muscle tone is established by stretch reflex. That is how a muscle tone is established. And stretch reflex you have already learned, madam has taught you, so you have an idea about that. So this is what we are going to be building on, your idea about stretch reflex, and that contributes to muscle tone. A normal tone is required by a person to be able to attain a normal posture, which is necessary for normally staying in one place or walking around or doing any activity. This is the idea that you're looking at today. So just brushing up your stretch reflex, you know that stretch reflex is the sensory organ is the muscle spindle, which is found on the belly of the muscle. It is activated by the stretch of the muscle. When the muscle is stretched, the muscle spindle is stretched, and as you know, it contains the nuclear bag and nuclear chain fibers. When they are stretched, the afferent 1A and 2 fibers will be stimulated, they will go through the dorsal horn into the spinal cord, and they end on the anterior in the ventral horn in the alpha motor neurons, and they stimulate the alpha motor neurons, which in turn will stimulate the extrafusal fibers, the muscle fibers, to contract the muscle. So when a muscle is stretched, it reflexively contracts so long as its innervation is intact. And additional to that, you learn that there are what is known as gamma fibers, these ones that are shown in pink on the side. And the role of gamma fibers was that they would stimulate the intrafusal fibers. The alpha motor neurons stimulated the muscle fibers, but the gamma fibers would stimulate the intrafusal fibers, which will maintain the spindle always in a constant state of slight stretch. So the muscle spindle ends are being stretched. Actually, the ends of the spindles, if you can see here, will have these contractile elements. The middle part doesn't have. The gamma motor neurons innervate the ends of them. So they are efferent neurons. They stimulate the ends to slightly contract. So when both the ends contract, the middle gets stretched. The same way like what would happen if the muscle were passively stretched. So at rest, the gamma motor neurons fire at a basal rate, which will slightly stretch the muscle spindle. So immediately, what is the reaction? There will be a reflex contraction of the muscle. So at rest, muscle is in a partial state of contraction. This is called tone. And the why this is happening is that when we studied stress reflex, you would have seen those graphs. A muscle that is supplied by the gamma motor neuron and under this partial tone will respond more vigorously when it receives an impulse from the central nervous system to contract. So it is readied or primed up to act. That is what the role of the stretch reflex is in, and the tone. So now today I'll be talking a bit more about the regulation of the muscle tone. You know what the stretch reflex is, and it causes the muscle tone. How is the muscle tone regulated? As you, if you have observed, you would see that all that you learned in physiology from the beginning till now, starting from the general physiology class, you would remember that the beginning we talked about something called homeostasis. The body has a normal set of way of functioning that is encoded in the genetic material that is maintained in the body. And this is steady state. In normal steady state is what all the body functions are trying to maintain. Any deviation from that state, the body tries to bring back to normal. And this happens not just by responding to things when something happens, rather every activity in the body, whether it's a biochemical activity or a neuromuscular activity, it is all a balance of the plus and the minus. It is all a balance of stimulation and inhibition. You would remember when you studied the cardiac pacemaker and all that, the native heart rate of the sinoatrial node is 120 per minute. But we say that the normal heart rate of a person is something between 70 and 100 and all we say. And we found out that that was because normally the sinoatrial node is under an inhibitory influence from the vagal tone, the normal vagal tone or the vagus nerve influence. And it is variations in these that helps to adapt to various stressful situations, various changes in our body. Same way, here also, the maintenance of muscle tone is a balance between stimulatory and inhibitory influences, which are mainly by the descending supraspinal pathways. We saw those tracks that earlier. It is the influences that come down, the balance of stimulatory and inhibitory influences that maintains normal muscle tone. The value of understanding this is that when we study lesions, when we see any changes, any abruption in the pathway, the effects that come about show us what has gone wrong, whether the stimulatory has gone wrong or the inhibitory has gone wrong. Accordingly is the symptom that will be shown out. So the main regulation of muscle tone is by the descending supraspinal pathways. Other factors influencing are the alpha gamma coactivation, anxiety. During anxiety, there is more alpha motor discharge, then unexpected movements. When there's a sudden unexpected movements, all these postural reflexes will trigger in, and there will be increased motor discharge to the muscles. Stimulation of skin by noxious agents can cause increased stimulus, and the genresic maneuver. You would remember that while you are trying to elicit certain reflexes which are difficult to elicit, we would ask the person to clench their teeth or lock their arms and try to pull them apart, etc. We learned at that time that when we do that, reflexively there will be more alpha motor discharge, and that will help to increase the tone of the muscle, so you'll get a better reflex reaction when you are doing that. So these are the other factors involved. We'll just look at the descending regulation by the descending supraspinal pathways. So this is an important diagram for you. It is from the textbook of Ganong and Guyton. Both of them have this. So this is a sum total of what influences the muscle tone. As you can see here, this is actually a cat brain diagram. So the central nervous system or the supraspinal control is what is shown here. That was shown in that red color is the stimulatory influences with the plus sign on it, and the others with the minus sign on it are the inhibitory influences. So mainly the regulation of the muscle tone comes from the reticular system. And there are two kinds of reticular areas. The red one shown there, number 5, is the pontine reticular area, which is an activating system. And number 4 is the medullary reticular area, which is an inhibitory system. And these systems are further under influence of other areas. For example, the cerebral cortex labeled 1, the basal ganglia labeled 2, and certain cerebellar nuclei all have inhibitory influences on tone, whereas the stimulatory area, pontine area, is almost self-sufficient. That is just like your pacemaker in your heart. Now, the area 5, the pontine regulatory area of the pontine reticular area, can spontaneously stimulate muscle tone, spontaneously stimulate gamma motor discharge there. And along with that, the area labeled 6 is the vestibular nuclei. The vestibular nuclei are also stimulatory, but normally the vestibular nuclei will be under suppressive influence from the cerebellum. That is how it functions. So we'll look into this. I have enumerated them later on. So this is basically the idea of how the influences come. We have a set of stimulatory influences, which is mainly the pontine reticular area, and the inhibitory influence is the medullary reticular area, number 4 here, and the medullary area is further under impression from the cortex labeled 1, basal ganglia labeled 2, and the cerebellar areas labeled 3. So the stimulatory pathways, as I said, is the pontine reticulospinal tract. It arises from the pontine reticular nuclei, and these are also influenced by deep cerebellar nuclei. So the main stimulatory area is the pontine reticular nuclei, which acts on the gamma motor neuron through the pontine reticulospinal tract, from the reticulum to the spine. So pontine reticulospinal tract. And these are also stimulated, as we saw in the last diagram, by certain deep cerebellar nuclei and also ascending sensory pathways. You would remember when you drew the ascending sensory pathways, it gives off radiations like your pain pathway, the pariospinothalamic tract, and all. You'll remember that it gives off radiations to the reticular formation. So those all will stimulate this area. So, and finally it's carried down through the vestibulospinal tract and the pontine reticulospinal tract. And additionally, other stimulatory pathways involved are the vestibulospinal tract and the rubrospinal tract. Just try to remember with these names. I believe you already got an idea of how it works. So main stimulatory area is the pontine reticulospinal tract from the pontine reticular nuclei. The pontine reticular nuclei are further under stimulatory influences from certain deep cerebellar nuclei also. The vestibular nuclei we spoke of. Also, vestibulospinal tract and rubrospinal tract. The rubrospinal tract is coming from the red nucleus. These both also have stimulatory influence on muscle tone. These are the stimulatory pathways. Now, what are the inhibitory influences? So the main center that is going to inhibit the muscle tone is the medullary reticulospinal tract, that is arising from the medullary reticular area nuclei. This is the main inhibitory center, and this center is further under the influence of the suppressor strip in the motor cortex, the basal ganglia, and also the anterior cerebellum. And as I said before, the stimulatory pontine area works by itself even when the above areas are not there. The inhibitory medullary area is under the influence of the supraspinal centers, the cortex and the brainstem centers also, the cortex, the basal ganglia, cerebellum, etc. It's a balance between these two that will help you to achieve muscle tone. Now, if you try to imagine this, why we spoke that we told that there is an increased tone in upper motor neuron lesions. Upper motor neuron lesions, when they happen, like say there's a stroke somewhere in the cortex, the inhibitory influence is reduced now, but the pontine reticular nuclear area is still safe. So the stimulatory influence is still going on there. So there is a reduction in the inhibitory influence and there is increase in the stimulatory influence. So what is the effect? There is increased muscle tone and spasticity. That this forms the basis for what we say as increased muscle tone or rigidity or spasticity in upper motor neuron lesions. So that was for the regulation of muscle tone. Now we'll go into the postural reflexes. Postural reflexes are reflexes involved in maintaining the posture and equilibrium of the body. Some of those we got to see in those images and videos that I told in the beginning. So the body is maintained in an upright and balanced position by the effect of the postural reflexes, and they provide adjustments necessary to maintain a stable posture during voluntary activity. So posture can be either maintaining a stable posture, or it could be what is required for movement also. Basically, movement is going from one posture to another. You're standing in one place, you're going to stand in another place, or sitting to standing, or going from one point to another doing a work. So it is, you're going from one posture to another constantly. So during this process, maintaining the stability of the body and helping us to do all the work properly is the postural reflexes, and they provide adjustments necessary to maintain a stable posture during voluntary motor activity. And most of the reflexes, as I told, do not need a conscious effort. And as in all the reflexes, you need to remember, whenever we talk about reflex, we need to try to remember what is the afferent, what is the receptor, what is the afferent, what is the integrating center, what are the efferent. These are things you should always remember when you use the term reflex. So here, afferent is impulses that we receive from the eyes, from the vestibular apparatus and proprioceptors. So the proprioceptors give a brain the sense of where each limb is, where each joint is, various movements that are happening at each joint, and your eyes give you an idea of the surrounding and the position of your body. The vestibular apparatus, so beautifully designed, you would have studied, helps us in detecting the changes in the body movement in all those various directions. And a combination of all these is the afferent to the central nervous system. The integrating central can be at the cerebral cortex level, brainstem level, and spinal cord level. At all these levels, certain reflexes need only the spinal cord intervention, whereas certain are mandatorily require the cerebral cortex. We'll be looking at that later on. Then the efference is finally the final common pathway. The alpha motor neurons are the final efferent pathway. So here I am listing out the postural reflexes. I'll be talking a little more detailed into a few of them, but basically we need to have an understanding of what those are. That's all. Not much of detail will be asked you about this, especially at the end. The writing reflexes I haven't mentioned because that usually is not asked for you. So the postural reflexes can be classified broadly into two, as static reflexes and dynamic reflexes. So what is a static reflex and what is a dynamic reflex? Static reflexes are continuously acting and so are called also attitudinal reflex. So it involves a sustained contraction of muscles due to effect of gravity. That is, these are things that are acting in a static state. For example, when I'm standing, so the anti-gravity muscles are constantly acting. My body maintains the posture when I'm standing straight, keeps me from falling down forward or backwards or to my side. This is what is involved in the static reflexes, also known as attitudinal reflexes. Then we have the dynamic reflexes of basic reflex. So from the definition of static reflex, now you know that dynamic is to do with what happens when you move. These are reflexes which involve transient movements. So when we are making a movement from one posture to the next, that is when these dynamic reflexes take place. So static reflexes are anti-gravity muscle tone, obviously understood. Then the positive supporting reaction is there. Tonic labyrinthine or tonic vestibular reflexes are there. and tonic neck reflexes are there. I will briefly mention what these are later on. And the dynamic reflexes are basic postural reflexes and writing reflexes. Basic postural stretch reflex, basic postural labyrinth reflex are what comes under basic postural reflexes, and then we have the writing reflex. Writing reflex simply is those things we already spoke about in those examples. When you are standing down, when there's a change in posture, the body tries to bring it back to a neutral posture where it's stable. That is what basically writing reflexes is. I'll be briefly mentioning that later on also. So yeah, as I told, the difference between the static and the dynamic reflexes. Dynamic reflexes short term, that is during a movement, change from the between postures, whereas tonic reflexes are sustained muscle contraction that need to be maintained for a longer time. This is the main difference between those two. Just to understand the difference, that's all. Now we need to understand at what all levels these are integrated. These reflexes that I mentioned now, I have mentioned here where all they are integrated. So at the spinal cord level, the muscle tone, the positive supporting reaction, and crossed extensor reaction are integrated. These you already know. Muscle tone by the stretch reflex. Positive supporting reaction actually just means that for these were experiments mainly studied in cats, or I will be showing a video later on which will help you understand that better. Then crossed extensors, you also studied that with the stretch reflex, or the stretch reflex and the crossed extensor reflex. These need only the spinal cord level of integration. So if only the spinal cord is intact and the brain and there's a cutoff above the level of the spinal cord, still these reflexes will remain. These will maintain even when the brain and brainstem are cut off from the spinal cord. Next, medullary level integration is required for tonic labyrinthine reflexes and tonic neck reflexes. You will be able to understand it a little better as I go ahead. Then midbrain level reflexes are the neck reflexes or the writing reflexes mainly, and cerebral cortex is necessary for hopping and placing reactions, and visual cortex is required for visual writing reflex. So why this order, why these mentioned like this? Studies, we have come to understand all of these by doing experiments on animals actually. So because in a normal person, like I am sitting down right now, some of you might be standing up or lying down. In all these postures, though all our postural reflexes are active, it is difficult to elicit that in a normal person because of the background muscular activity. It's not just the reflexes. All sorts of muscular activity, voluntary and involuntary activities are going on. So in the middle of that, you won't be able to identify each reflex. So lesions are made. For example, you'll see here that there was these studies were done. On the bottom, you can see these 5 levels of cutoffs were done. So first level of cutoff is spinal animal. That is, a lesion is made between the medulla oblongata and just below the level of the medulla oblongata. So only the spinal cord is left. When that is done, all these reflexes mediated at the spinal cord level alone will be present. The rest of the reflexes listed below will be gone. The same way, lesion at each level, decerebrate animal, midbrain animal, thalamic preparation, and decorticate preparation. I will be going into those later on. Each of them as one step higher and helped us to understand at what level these reflexes were integrated and what those reflexes were. One of the important personalities behind its identification is Professor Charles Sherrington. He is the one who identified a lot of the functions of the neuron, how the CNS integrated all this, and for that he received the Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine in 1932. Sherrington's experiments on cats done somewhere in the 1890s give us most of the idea of what I'll be going to talk of from here on. And the term release phenomena written there is something that we need to keep in mind. Remember, when I told you about the regulation of muscle tone and I told you that there are negative inhibitory influences and stimulatory influences. Stimulatory influences are more predominant, and the inhibitory keep them in control. If you take away the inhibitory influences, immediately stimulatory influences will predominate, and they will go into a state of hypertonia, which happens in the upper motor neuron lesions. So That is what happens in these procedures. You're going to cut off from a lower level higher up, and you see how at each level, when you release the influence of the levels above that, you see the actual effects that that particular level can manifest. So when you cut off the brain and brainstem, you see what the spinal cord itself can do without the influence of the higher centers. This is the idea behind all these experiments. So these are the lesions they made. So spinal animal means the lesion was made at the level of just below the medulla oblongata. Then decerebration was actually a mid-collicular lesion, that is just above the pons between the inferior and superior colliculus is where this was made. Then midbrain animal was just below the thalamus. Thalamic animal was a lesion just above. You needn't remember these. I'm telling these just for your understanding. Okay. So thalamic animal was just above the thalamus, and decortication finally is if you just cut off the cortex alone by cutting off obviously your pyramidal tracts. That is how these lesions were made. So each level higher we made. So what effects were achieved while doing that? This is a diagram from genome. You need to look at it right now, but once I'm done with this class, you need to go back and look at the diagram. You should be able to understand. That is the idea of this whole thing. So this here actually these A, B, C, and D, they are all various level lesions that are shown there. Okay, so spinal animal, as we told, the lesion is between the just below the medulla oblongata. So now you have only your spinal cord. So all the spinal reflexes will be there. Your stretch reflex will be there. Positive supporting reaction will be there. Magnet reaction will be there. Writing reflexes will not be there because they are a function of the medulla. Okay, and hypertonia will be seen because the stretch reflex will be active because you have the stretch reflex arc there. Stimulatory influence from the normal stretch reflex will be happening, but the inhibitory influence from the brain is not there. So there will be increased tone like in the upper motor neuron lesions. This is not the same as upper motor neuron lesion, but there will be increased tone like the upper motor neuron lesion. So stretch reflex will be intact, positive supporting reaction will be that, and magnet reaction. So this video shows you what a positive supporting reaction is. So this is a child that is not yet able to stand, but when you put that child on a surface, when its foot touches a surface, immediately the extensors of his leg go into action and they become like pillars. The same thing happened in these experiment animals. I couldn't find an image or a video of the experimental animals actually. In those experimental animals, when a spinal animal, say a cat with its just a spinal cord intact, is put on a floor, the moment its foot touches the floor, immediately that limb will become like a pillar. All the extensors will go into spasm, and all four limbs will go become like a pillar that is ready to support the animal's weight. The animal is not able to do it voluntarily because the brain is cut off. It will not be able to stand up normally. But if you take it up and touch something to its foot, even if you're putting your hand under its foot, immediately the legs will come into a state of extension. This is what is positive supporting reaction. Then we have next is a decerebrate animal. So the lesion is the mid-collicular level lesion that is between the inferior and superior colliculus. And what we see here is extensive rigidity will be seen, especially of the extensor muscles. And you would remember that I told you that the anti-gravity muscles are mainly the extensor muscles in our body. So there will be extensive rigidity of the extensor muscles. And the last diagram on that shown here, the one at the right end is what shows the decerebrate animal. The first three are actually decorticate. The last one here is the decerebrate. You will see that the neck is in hyperextension, head is extended backwards. Both the limbs are in extension and internal rotated. This is a posture that is seen in decerebrate lesion. This is normally not seen in human beings because the lesion that could cause that is fatal, because your brainstem is cut off, so the respiratory nuclei are gone, the cardiovascular nuclei are gone, so the person will succumb, will die. So you don't see this normally. Whereas the decorticate lesions, the first three you would see commonly when you're going to the ward in people who have stroke, massive strokes and all. You will see this position of decortication that you can see. Decerebration will be seen in the clinical side. transiently. Usually in a person who has a gross head trauma, there's a large intracranial bleed, the brain is being pushed down due to the pressure inside the skull, and there's something called coning. As the brain is pushed out through the foramen magnum, at that point the pressure will cause damage to the midbrain, the medullary nuclei, and usually immediately the person dies. They will not sustain, and so that is something that will transiently see, usually associated with trauma. So here again you would see the release phenomenon, that is the stimulatory areas are remaining. Remember, this is just above the pons, so the pontine stimulatory area is remaining, but the medullary stimulatory inhibitory area doesn't get influences from the cortex, etc. So the stimulatory effect of the pontine stimulatory area is more, so the tone is increased. So these reflexes are released from the inhibition of the medullary inhibitory area. So there's increased tone here, and this is known as the decerebrate posture, the one on the right end. All reflexes of the spinal animal, like the tonic, spinal animal will be there, like the stretch reflex, the positive supporting reaction, etc. And along with that, tonic labyrinthine and tonic neck reflexes will be also there. I am not going into deep in what these reflexes are because you need to know just what they are and the levels at which they are integrated. Okay, but I would recommend that you just go through them once. Your textbook GK-PAL has a short chapter on that, and you go through them and have an understanding of what they are. So finally, this person also cannot stand up voluntarily. A decerebrate animal also cannot stand up voluntarily. Now going on to midbrain animal, that is a lesion that is above the midbrain, just below the thalamus. So important brainstem nuclei are now intact. So respiration, cardiovascular, all those things are happening. The stimulatory and inhibitory areas are there, but the inhibition from above is not there. So the person still has an increased level of rigidity, just not that much as in a decerebrate animal, that is all. This person can assume an upright posture, but not voluntarily. That is you can help that person or an animal into an upright posture, and that person will remain straight like that. And reflexive walking happens. What reflexive walking is, I've kept a video at the end, I'll show you there. So it is reflexively, just like you remember what we just spoke about, the positive supporting reaction. When you put the foot down, immediately the whole limb extends to support the weight. So that is reflexive. That kind of a reflexive walking can be achieved. Some amount the spinal and midbrain reflexes will help you to walk there, but not voluntarily. With support, if the person's foot is put down, immediately one foot becomes strong. Then you put the other foot put down, and that foot becomes strong. But the person can't himself do it. It is only by somebody else's support that this can be done. That is what happens in the midbrain animal. And here, writing reflexes are also present because those are a function of the midbrain. One factor here is temperature regulation is lost because the lesion is still below level of the thalamus and hypothalamus, where the temperature regulation is there. So such an animal, experimental animal, is difficult to maintain because temperature regulation is not there. The animal could go into hyper or hypothermia, and that will cause death there. So this is the reflexive walking. This is a cat whose spinal cord has been severed above, and it is being supported. It is held up by bands and by the person, and it is just the positive supporting reaction that is helping the cat to walk there. So this can be done with support only. Writing reflexes, I'll just mention a few of them, not going into detail. Mainly these are all the writing reflexes: the labyrinthine writing reflex, the body on head writing reflex, neck writing reflex, body on body writing reflex, visual writing reflex, hopping reaction, and placing reaction. So I'll just mention what the hopping reaction and placing reaction are. Basically, this is something that you have experienced yourself. When you're standing, say in a crowd, waiting in queue, say to take a movie ticket or something, and the crowd pushes you and you suddenly lose your balance and about to fall. Immediately, usually a hopping reaction happens. That is, if you're pushed off to your right side, immediately along with the extension of the right limb to support yourself in case of a fall, you'll hop 2-3 times until you're stabilized. Chadi നമ്മൾ stabilize ചെയ്യാൻ പലപ്പോഴും. When you're about to fall, we take few steps, രണ്ട് മൂന്ന് step എടുത്തിട്ട് we get stabilized. That kind of a hopping reaction is a reflexive reaction there. It is a writing reflex. And placing reaction is that if an intact animal, that is an animal with all its nervous supply is intact, is made to fall, the limbs spread out as if to place the body on a floor. Visual reflex should be intact, the visual pathway should be intact, and the cortex is essential for this reaction. And this is a reaction that you have noticed with the cats. If you drop a cat from a height, even if it is upside down, when you drop it, by the time it reaches the floor, it will come down on all four limbs. It will not fall down or damage itself. That is placing reaction. That's something that you've seen. Writing reflexes, you just need to know the names. That is all. Need to know in detail. I just mentioned these two because those are things that you see every day that you can understand. Okay. And next we have the thalamic animal. So the thalamus is also left a lesion just above the level of the thalamus. So here all the reflexes are the same as what we had in the midbrain animal. Additionally, temperature regulation and autonomic function are also intact. So it is easy to maintain this animal to conduct studies for longer time. That is all. Okay, that is all the what you see different thalamic animal. Finally, we have the decorticate animal. That is only the cortex is cut off. The rigidity will be less now because the stimulatory pontine stimulatory area is there, the reticular inhibitory area is there, and some amount of stimulation from areas like the basal ganglia, cerebellum, red nucleus, everything is intact. Only the cortex is cut off. So there is not much rigidity like that of the decerebrate animal. Some amount is still there, but it's reduced rigidity. Only reflexes that are going to be absent is visual writing reflex, placing reaction, and hopping reaction, because these absolutely require the cerebral cortex to coordinate. Without the cortex, these can't be there. Except these few reflexes, every other reflex will be there. Okay. Now you should be able to understand this diagram. I am not going to that because your time is almost over. Please look up that diagram in Ganong, and a description is given below the diagram also. And based on that, if you have a doubt, you can ask me. You will not have to draw this diagram, it's too complex for you. But the main idea in this whole chapter, in so far as posture reflex is concerned, is you need to know at which levels each reflex is coordinated. Know the names of the reflexes, have in your mind a brief idea of the reflex so that you can write something if it comes for a short note or an essay. Mainly remember at which area each reflex is coordinated. So to summarize, normal posture is required for all activities, whether you are still or moving. Posture and equilibrium are made possible involuntarily through muscle tone and postural reflexes. There is a voluntary component to this also, but it's mainly an involuntary activity. These are integrated at various levels, starting from the spinal cord all the way to the motor cortex, and involves complex planning, execution, and feedback regulation also. Yeah, you have done some activity, your body is constantly taking your CNS is constantly taking feedback and seeing how well it has been executed and making changes accordingly also. And various lesions of the lower motor and upper motor level produce characteristic symptoms due to disruption in the pathways regulating the posture and tone. I hope all those parts you could understand. Okay. And I would recommend that today itself you read chapter 149 on regulation of muscle tone, posture, and movement from GK PAL, the second edition GK PAL. I believe that's a book you all have. So it's not a very long chapter. If you read it through today itself, this info will get solid in your head. Some of the parts that I didn't explain much, especially on the reflex, each reflex and all, reading through that will help you to understand that and solidify it a bit more. As you remember, when we learn from learning and memory, to commit something from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, it takes time and repetitive action to commit there. Attention, time, and repetitive action. So today itself, go through this chapter, understand it. If you have any doubt, you have my email address and you have my phone number also. You can contact over WhatsApp or anything. You can, or email, and you can ask me your doubts, or even come to PG room directly. You can clear your doubts. So thank you. That's all. And this will probably, I believe, be my last lecture with you. Your theory lectures are coming to an end. So thank you guys for your cooperation in the class. Hope I have been able to convey these things to you. It's a bit complex, I understand, but this chapter comes from the basis of what you've already learned. That's why certain parts I didn't go much into detail into. Yet, if you have any doubts, please you can ask me at any time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir.